May the 11th, 2020. Guys, you're looking at the National Weather Service map from today, and it reminds me of back in the 1800s when we were going through another grand solar minimum of how the weather was, and there's kind of a battle between the north and the south. What you're looking at, guys, again, we're May the 11th, you're looking at freeze warnings, winter weather advisories, frost advisories. Check this out. And in Texas, coming out of New Mexico, and you see the high wind warnings back west of there, but here you've got severe thunderstorm watches, severe thunderstorm warnings, and flash flood warnings. Why? Because if you look at this, there's a boundary, guys, right in this area. Cold, warm moisture coming out of the Gulf and the Pacific Ocean this way. And so we're dealing with a battle. We're late in the year to be having this type of weather in the north. It shouldn't be there, but it's happened before, and I want to talk about it. But again, from west of the Great Lakes all the way to the East Coast and offshore, because of the difference in the temperature, we're having weather, what I would call a conflict in the weather. Now, this goes back to 1816, what we're looking at. Now, I don't know if this will be the year. I'm not saying that. But many people have planted up in the Northeast, and when we talked about this a few days ago, and I was telling everyone, if you got plants outside or whatever, cover them up, and many of you came in and commented and said that you had done just that. But in 1816, I think it was, and we'll pull that up, we had what was called a year without a summer, and it was in a grand solar minimum. Again, it may be next year, but we're starting to see signs on our sun that solar cycle 25 is trying to kick in because of the opposite magnetism of the sunspots and the other things that we're seeing there. But let's look at that. Let's again go back to 1816. And if we look at this, again, the year 1816, it was known as the year without a summer, also the poverty year, and 1800 and froze to death. Some of the names that were put to that. Many of you are familiar with the gold rush, where a lot of the population of the South and the East moved all the way to California, Washington, and Oregon and searched for gold. But do you know that this year, 1816, more people migrated to the West because their crops froze. It never really thawed out during the summer. And to keep from starving to death, they moved to the West Coast. So there was more migrants during this time than there was during the gold rush. But it says because of severe climate abnormalities that caused average global temperatures to decrease by 0.4 to 0.7 centigrade, or 0.72 to minus 1.26 Fahrenheit. Those are very minute numbers, but that's all it takes. That's all it takes, just a few degrees to change everything. You guys in the Northeast right now, you got snow on you, got ice in certain places. If you didn't cover your crops, you've got problems there. Now, what they're talking about, again, is volcanic activity during grand solar minimum, and we've seen that in the last few years. You got thin shields, weak shields, you got all this gamma radiation, solar radiation pumping into the Earth's atmosphere. It's transferred into the core of the Earth via the magnetic shields. That is why your compass works. And when that happens, because of weak shields, you would think it would be just the opposite, but not. It heats up the core, it heats up the magma, and you have large volcanic eruptions. And Mount Tambora in April in the Dutch East Indies, now called Indonesia, this eruption was the largest in at least 1,300 years. And again, during a grand solar minimum. And they're talking about the eruption also in 1814. Just before this, of the eruption of Mayon in the Philippines. And what happens is you get these great ash clouds that circumnavigate the globe, and that adds to these cooling effects. Again, we're looking at the weather in the Northeast, and the boundary between that and the wet, moist, warm air that's coming out of the Gulf of Mexico and off of Mexico itself. And there's a conflict there, and we're seeing these great tornadoes. And we're getting now, guys, we're only a couple of weeks away from the beginning of hurricane season. And so will we see the exact pattern that we saw last year? Remember what happened to the Bahamas? So we're watching it, guys. You watch it. And again, look at history. It's a very, very interesting study to look up the year without a summer and look at what happened. Again, more people migrated to the West Coast during this period to keep from starving to death after the crops failed. The cattle were frozen to death. People were starving. More people moved to the West Coast than they did during the gold rush. It's definitely a good study. Also, tomorrow, sometimes during the AM, there will be an update on about 3 comets, guys. It's a heads up. Be safe.